All right, good afternoon, and thank you everyone for coming. My name is Alex Johnson, and I am one of the Center for Japanese Studies master's students. Before we get started, I have a few general CJS announcements. So this is the last CJS noon lecture of the fall semester. Our winter lecture series will start next month on January 22nd with the talk, Why Place Matters, the Publicness of the Lost Landscape by Professor Saburo Horikawa. And our winter film series will also kick off in January. The CJX film series is the longest running Japanese film series in the world, and we're excited for this year's theme, comedy. Attendance is free to all, and films will be screened at the State Theater. Please visit our website or follow our social media pages to learn more about upcoming CJS events. For attendees on Zoom, webcams and microphones have been turned off. We invite you to use the Q&A function during the lecture to submit questions, and our presenter will address as many as possible after their talk. If you would like closed captions, the live transcription feature is available. The caption settings are in the bottom right corner of the Zoom window. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Allison. She is a professor of cultural anthropology at Duke University, and she's written many books about Mhm.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you to the Center of Japanese Studies for inviting me. Thank you, Sarah Chittenden, for the smoothest organization of a visit that I have ever had. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for the people who are attending by Zoom. It's a very cold day, as I discovered this morning, and I appreciate you coming out to hear my talk. So I am just going to read the talk and I invite questions. I don't think I'm going to go on too long. And so I would really appreciate having questions about anything that I raise. Recrafting closeness in depth. Relational proxies for future Japanese. Tending to the TED is a human universal, as philosophers and scholars have endlessly proclaimed, as the response to death that endows life itself with meaning and value beyond corporeal existence. The living mark the expiration of fellow humans with recognition, remembrance, respect. This is the work of care, tending to the physical remains of the dead and memorializing the passing of an individual done by others. For the dead, as historian Thomas LaCour puts it, define generations, demarcate the sacred and the profane, and as the guarantors of land and power and authority, mirror the living to themselves. Yet, what happens when this logic of death care, as well as the sociological mechanism for carrying it out, has begun to fray? This is the situation in contemporary Japan, where the continuity of generations, so heavily symbolized by the sacredness once tethered to the ancestral dead, is coming undone. Today, the child, once the symbol and foundation of what queer theorist Lee Edelman calls the reproductive futurism of political order, is both figuratively and literally on the decline. Instead, it is the single senior who captures the demographic present in a country where the overall population has been decreasing since 2008. 30% are over the age of 65. The mean life expectancy is 84. Marital and co-residency rates are on the decline. The birth rate is far below replacement levels, and 34% of households are single. This means that the patrilineal kinship system, once responsible for the task of mortuary care, as well as that of social reproduction, is falling apart. The family grave once served as the anchor of familial connection, where ancestors were buried for generations, where family members gathered at holidays and special anniversaries, and where the patrilineal line was given sanctity and identity. Yet today, more and more Japanese are facing death without a grave to enter and with no one to tend to them once there. In what some scholars have called Japan's dead in the era without family, naki, jidai no shisha, the deceased face a possible future of no future at all. As I discovered when doing fieldwork on the subject, an increasing number of Japanese lack a family grave to enter at death and must come up with an alternative plan to avoid having no place to go. Yukiba ganai. Religious scholar Mori Kenji considers such precarity of burial to signal an ebbing of sacredness, a threat to Japan's very cultural soul. And he consigns the state of affairs, the country's becoming a muenshakai, a disconnected society, to the absence or refusal of intimate others to assume the role of, in this case, caregiving the dead. But does the practice of grief, mourning, and caring for the dead simply disappear when those who hitherto carried it out no longer do so? Or does the work of death care get remade by redesigning the role of grieving away from certain humans or even humans altogether? This is what I consider in my talk today. Looking at the case of Japan, where in response to the sociological decline in the successors once assigned the role of primary griever, a bevy of new initiatives, services, and goods have emerged since the start of the new millennium to fill in the gap. Sorry, I'll wait till the next slide comes up. Generically referred to as shukatsu, literally ending activity, this is the enterprise of seeking methods for safekeeping the dead, a repository for the remains, and an avenue for memorializing the deceased that serve as an alternative to the family mortuary system, done often while one is still alive in anticipation of not having a family grave or close kin to make arrangements after one is dead. This is also called seizen seidi, ordering, as in ordering one's death arrangements ahead of time by and for oneself. Futurity then is brought into the present, and grief-making rendered into an activity to be managed by the deceased herself. Managed by the to-be deceased. One is doing it ahead of time. Feeding this new boom is a sense of social crisis around death. The news today is filled with stories of abandoned family graves nationwide, of urns left stranded in trains and public parks, and of a rise in the phenomenon of lonely death. Residents who living all alone die that way, leaving behind bodies that go undiscovered for what can be months. At the same time, customary belief informed by both Buddhist precepts and ancestor worship is that dead who fail to have related others to be buried alongside or care given post-death will become disconnected souls, muenbotoke, raising the specter of wandering ghosts, restless and hungry forever. This is an unsavory prospect. To offer a better alternative, mortuary care is getting redesigned in Japan that no longer depends on a kinship system that increasing numbers of Japanese cannot rely on. The next section is called New Style Grief Machines. Here, I focus on one particular model of alternative resting place, purposely designed to avoid reliance upon the successors necessary for a family grave. Gaining popularity in urban Japan, this is automatic style delivery columbarium, jidohan soshiki no kotsudo, where ashes interred in storage boxes are automatically transported to a handful of graves for visitation. As is increasingly common in the newer interment options, automated graves forego the requirement that still stands in most cemeteries in Japan of needing a successor or other designated kin to pay annual fees and maintain the grave. Called the chief mourner, this person was legally designated in the Meiji Civil Code of 1898 as the one to inherit both the property and responsibilities of ancestral transmission. And though the state's embeddedness in patrilineal continuity was dismantled following the war, when the new constitution now deemed a grave to be the final resting place for the individual, rather than the site of reverence for the patrilineal line, the family system of death care remained both customary and normative throughout the 20th century. By the 1990s, however, as social, economic, and demographic shifts unsettled the familial unit, mortuary practices involving ancestral graves and kin-dependent rituals started unraveling as well. But if this has left an increasing number of Japanese at risk, it should be remembered that the old system always embedded hierarchies and exclusions as well. By the principle of primogeniture, for example, only first sons can be buried in the family grave, forcing second and further sons to establish their own graves as branch families. And women expected to enter the grave of their husband's family are disconnected from that of their natal family and stranded altogether, having changed their name, if divorced. As feminist Inoue Haruo puts this familial template for death care at once patrilineal and patriarchal leaves quite a few people out. And this has only become exacerbated in recent years, with shifts that have reduced ever more households to the single individual. As she notes in her recent book, O Hitori-sama Jidai no Shinshikata, The Way of Death in an Age of Singles, the single household outnumbered those of married couples and children starting in 2010, and now is the most common form, constituting 40%. Hence the need for what she calls mortuary options for those who have nobody to depend upon, miyori ga nai shita. At her own facility, the first natural burial site in Tokyo that enclosed within, though unaffiliated with the Buddhist cemetery, started in 2005. Inoue upholds a de-successor model, datsukeisho, that she sees as more democratic and inclusive. Here, by paying a one-time fee and signing a contract, one becomes a member of Ending Center that comes with a plot and an annual memorial ceremony that all members, living and dead, can attend. Here, anyone can be buried, alone or with a pet. And though it is not called the role of a griever, the beauty of the cherry blossoms, as well as the friendship of fellow Ending Center members, is said to keep everyone from sleeping in eternity alone. But the principle of grieving otherwise operates differently in the automated grave. Here, it is the techno-social apparatus designed by a material resources company that built its business on making conveyor belts for Toyota's just-in-time delivery system. Daifuku was part of Japan's post-industrialist surge following the war that, by investing in new technology and management styles, catapulted gross national production to record highs throughout the 1970s, making Japan a global power and its economy the second largest in the world by the 1980s. Toyotism, or lean production, was one of Japan's signature innovations, that updating the Taylorism deployed by Henry Ford in America's brand of mass car production, introduced a more flexible syncing up of production and demand. Rather than storing large quantities of raw materials for future production and stockpiling already assembled cars, production awaits customer demand before initiating and completing the process. Reducing waste in terms of space, Toyotism also ensures quick production by eliminating unnecessary steps on the assembly line. The lean production of Japan's automobile industry was both admired and adopted around the world. But by the 1990s, after the bursting of the bubble economy, Daifuku needed to innovate its operation. Now it entered a new market, Japan's aging population, seeking different provisions for mortuary care other than the family grave. In 1996, it designed the first mechanism implemented in Japan for automatic graveyards. By retaining the form of the conventional grave, but circulating remains in and out on a just-in-time basis according to the demands of visitation, the number of graves needed, as well as the cost and labor to inter and visit the dead, was significantly reduced. The first automatic style delivery system, Columbaria, in the country was built in conjunction with the Buddhist temple Banshoji, and there are now 30 nationwide. The largest, an expansion of the one at Banshoji temple, houses the remains of 12,000 deceased. In practice, how does this work? As in the case of Senichidani, an automated grave built as a collaboration between a 400-year-old Jodo Buddhist temple and Hasegawa, Japan's largest mortuary business, and beautifully designed with the finest materials by Japanese architect Kuma Kengo. The premises are structured with a storage warehouse on one side and the interior for visitation on the other. Actually, there's the warehouse on the right-hand side. Now the grave, here, I got lost. Located in central Tokyo, just minutes from a subway stop. The premises are convenient, and upon entering the lobby on the left, one taps their card on the monitor to be given the number of which of 6 graves on the second floor to proceed to. Within 40 seconds, the remains of one's loved one will have been transported by the automated conveyor belt system in the warehouse to the black granite grave that, appointed with fresh flowers and electronic incense, is kept immaculately clean. Each grave has drapes one can discreetly close for privacy during visitation, as well as a digital screen on the right for circulating images of the dead. Once there, the black box, stenciled with the family name and containing the remains of as many as 8 deceased, will have been inserted inside the grave. After visitation, bowing the head, clasping hands, saying a prayer, one presses the button on the right side, thereby closing the door and releasing the remains to be returned to the warehouse next door. Now the grave is emptied and ready for the next occupant. A turnstile operation that can accommodate thousands of deceased and those visiting them, and one in which the form of the ancestral grave is retained, but for an occupancy that is temporary as well as fungible. Residents that remain there for only the duration of a visit, if even that. This is flexible habitation, which is strikingly at odds with the durability over time that occurs at a family grave, inhabited by members of a single patriline, and that depends very much on the care, the visitation, and presence of living kin. When I asked Ueno-san, the director of Senichidani, about all this, and the scarcity of visitors I noticed on all 3 of my visits to automated graves, he reassured me that visitors do come, particularly on special occasions. But he also told me that Senichidani, built as a second tier to what is a conventional cemetery at the temple for their parishioners, filled with family graves, purposely targets those who seek a more streamlined, minimalistic burial option, whether because they lack successors and kin or do not want to burden them with maintaining a traditional grave. But here, as he suggested, the grave system runs on its own, as it were. Members pay a one-time fee, and the premises are maintained with fresh flowers, electronic incense, and tidying up by the staff standing in for the family. So no one gets abandoned. And those set up for visitation by living kin, with 6 beautiful graves set in the middle of the facility, sacredness, if that is the currency operating here, does not actually depend on intimate relatives coming to pay their respects. The next section is called Visitation by Other Means. Grave visitation, ohakamari, has been central to honoring the dead in Japan. In this tradition, kin are expected to come during New Year's and Obon, the summer season when dead are invited back to Earth for 2 days, as well as during equinoxes and special anniversaries. Tidying the grave and cleaning it with water, they bring fresh flowers, light incense, and clasp their hands in prayer. Within a family or ancestral grave, bodaiji, there will be generations of ancestors, and the belief is that it takes 33 years for deceased to transition to the state of ancestor, or Buddha or God, whatever the religious concept adhered to. This becoming sacred depends on the labor of the living descendants, on visiting the grave, performing the ceremonies on key anniversaries, and tending to household shrines at home. In what is an ongoing cycle of reciprocity, descendants tend to the ancestors just as they expect to be tended to as well, with all joining the ancestral collective at some point following death. This makes graves a site not merely for the dead, but also for the living. And the cycling in and out of visitors breathes a temporality into the grave considered to be eternal. This is the principle and premise of kinship, of the continuity of existence across time and beyond the expiration of single biological lives, what Lacour considers to be the root of the sacredness we attribute to the dead. But even if the genealogical notion of continuity still has resonance in Japan, its sustainability is severely under threat, as laid out already. This is the situation of a friend, for example, who, along with her sister, both single and childless, will be the end of their family line once dead. While they now tend to their family grave, no one will do so once they pass, leaving it lonely and a mess, as my friend put it. But also, when annual fees go unpaid, cemeteries will reclaim the plots, empty the graves, and re-enter the ashes into collective plots for the disconnected. For when purchasing a plot in a cemetery, one never owns the land, but is just renting it for a period of time. This means that once payment stops, time runs out. But becoming a disconnected soul is not what my friend desires, either for herself or the ancestors she now tends to at the family grave. She is therefore seeking an alternative and is considering a place like Senichi Denmi that presents a more sustainable model, one that takes the form of the traditional grave but redesigns it to run even without the care or visitation by kin. Here, staff keep the premises tidy and constantly refresh with flowers and electronic incense. And because this new style columbaria is connected to a Buddhist temple, as most of them are, a Buddhist priest on staff performs the Buddhist Memorial Sutra Kuyo for all those interred here, and does so for a time period said to be eternal. A service called Eitai Kuyo, or Eternal Memorial, this is becoming increasingly popular at the alternative burial facilities, popping up all over the country, and is targeted particularly at those without family or kin to oversee the performance of this ritual, as they have traditionally done so. The promise of eternal memorial offers a form of continuity to substitute that of kin, and comes on the basis of paying a one-time membership fee and signing a contract, a consumer model of death care, and something now available to literally anyone, provided they can afford it. And it is being used by not only single Japanese anticipating their own futures without anyone to tend to them, but also for ancestors whose death was long in the past. It is to avoid the latter becoming disconnected souls that my friend intends to exhume the remains of her ancestors sometime soon and reinter them in an urban columbarium like Senichidani, where they too will receive the promise of eternal care. Though often costly and complex, these practices of closing graves, hakajimai, and reburying the context, kaiso, have become increasingly popular. An interesting reversal from the countryside where ancestral graves are getting abandoned to the cities where ancestors can now find a second life in techno-futuristic mortuary designs. So grave visitation gets retained, even if the work of sustaining this death care gets outsourced from kin to others. and in pre-mortuary plans, often arranged by the to-be deceased oneself while still alive in anticipation of dying kinless and alone. But in the automated grave system, affixed with a belt that makes for a just-in-time visitation system, the grave itself would seem to be both a potent and empty sign. For the technology exists as if visitation still matters, performing the work of grief as a techno-social prosthesis that runs in place of the humans who once visited the grave and are no longer so essential to doing so. Next section, a few other trends. But reinventing grave visitation or the grave itself has many iterations these days in the shukatsu boom, where new designs are often pitched as ways of staying close with the dead. For example, temotokyo, literally at-hand memorial goods, constitute a range of hand-held urns to necklaces, earrings, and pendants crafted with ashes from the deceased. As the person who designed a diamond version of these put it, instead of making tedious trips to the grave, my wife will now be able to have my remains in a beautiful jewel that is wearable by her all the time. Another vendor of a cremane jewelry line promotes his product as being akin to a companion that keeps the wearer from ever being lonely again. As he told me laughingly, with a necklace crafted from her mother's cremains, his wife now wears her mother every day. But such grief devices still depend on a living griever. Another new age ending iteration reimagines the necessity or makeup of the sociality involved in death care itself. At a number of new burial grounds that do not require one have a successor or close kin to be buried there, activities with fellow members while still alive are offered as part of the service, given once one acquires a plot. Everything from workshops on how to write a will or design one's own funeral to coffee clatches and meetups. These gatherings are of persons who will be proximate to one another in death. Inoue Haruyo, who stages many of these annually at her own natural burial spot in Tokyo, calls this a transfamilial, flexible kind of relationality between a word that she coined, grave friends, hakatomo. While these bonds don't necessarily care or grieve the dead going into the future, there is something akin here to what we might call sacredness, of embedding in death equality or sociality beyond the biological existence on Earth of the solo individual. I see this in the trend of ending notes as well, something of a fad that starting a few years ago involves notebooks sold even in convenience stores to be filled with personal information that one would like to be memorialized by at death, such as favorite songs, movies, trips. But as a single friend confessed, the one she religiously updated might never be read by anyone else or materialize at a funeral that she doubted she would have. Nevertheless, the activity itself seemed at once intimate and joyful, albeit by and about herself. A practice of anticipatory grievability performed in the present to stand in for those rituals and grievers this woman may never have at the time of death. I'll say something about that during Q&A if you want to ask about Pepper. Conclusion. The case of Japan today regarding death care is an interesting one. And despite the particularities of its high aging, low fertility demographics, with a tradition of mortuary care so dependent on a kinship system rapidly diminishing today, the situation there foreshadows global trends. Populations are aging and fertility dropping across the world, and old forms of caring for the dead are being challenged elsewhere, whether because of land constraints, affordability, or simple impracticality. In such times as these, there is much to learn, I would argue, from examples set in Japan. Not perhaps in the specifics of new style mortuary designs. I can't see automated graves taking off anytime soon in the US. for example, but the willingness, energy, and openness to try something new for the dead, and this in a country where the ancestral grave and visitations to it have been at the heart of cultural traditions, struck me as quite remarkable. And it also suggests a refusal to simply let the practice of tending to the dead die, as well as a refusal on the part of so many Japanese to accept becoming nothing and no one in the future themselves as relationless souls. This is what I take from the automated delivery columbarium, that with its techno gears for rotating cremains into and out of a handful of graves to keep it from being or appearing to be simply a storage warehouse for the dead. An investment in a new kind of grievability. A bit illogical, perhaps, even fanciful. But as Judith Butler has said about the precarity of the times, those who do not matter in life become ungrievable in death. And what we are seeing in Japan are efforts made to keep the dead mattering by reimagining what grief could look like, even for those without others to grieve them. And doing so is just in time. For while the need for human care is ever pressing, the supply of humans being able to give that care is diminishing quickly. Time, I say then, to pay attention to creative new designs for care, whether for the living or the dead, and coming from wherever they come from, and in this case, Japan. Thank you. I'm open for questions.
We do have a question from Zoom to begin. Um, the Okay, I'm gonna try and summarize a little bit. This person said they had the opportunity to visit the Philippines over the past few years, and within the past few decades, there's a proliferation of Japan surplus stores, which are full of belongings not claimed after someone passes. They are saying it seems like an expansion of funerary associated commodification, but not necessarily related to mourning, but more so speaking to the increase in loneliness. And they said, I'm just curious if this has been a consideration or factor in your research.
Wow, great question. That's a little eerie. Um, so for my field work, one of the I did field work in multiple sites. I did a lot in Ending Center with Inoue Haro, and I did a lot with cleanup workers. And there's a new genre of business called Ihin Seiri Gaisha, and they will go and clean up, not just people who are lonely dead, but if you have a loved one who dies and you don't have the time to clean up their house and they have a lot of stuff, you can hire them and they will help you, clean up. And so I followed them on the case. And I checked out a lot of them and I interviewed a lot of them. And I went to a warehouse of one, and he took me to a warehouse where there was tons of stuff. And he said, we ship this overseas. And he was the only one who admitted that. And he said, well, a lot of this stuff is still pretty good. And in Japan, often if there were loved ones involved, they wouldn't necessarily want it because there can be, this is changing a little bit, but there can be kind of a stigma to old used stuff from the dead. But so interesting question. And it does raise the question about commodification. So someone is benefiting and capitalizing on this stuff and sending it overseas. Yeah, I don't know if I have anything more profound to say about that, but yeah, I think that's a part of this business. And this new shukatsu, it's serving people who need to have an alternative to the family system, but it is a new frontier. It's a new capitalist frontier. And I showed you one scene of Endix, which is Ending Exhibit. It's a convention for those in the mortuary industry, started in 2014. And I've gone 4 times. It's always in the summer, always Obon season in Tokyo, Odaiba, big Tokyo site. It's kind of a trip, 3 days of people who are in the mortuary, whether they're in the funeral business or whether they're in the cremation business or whether they sell headstones or whatever. And you see all these new innovative designs. And the robot that I showed you, Pepper, that is SoftBank, I saw Pepper 2016 reciting Buddhist sutras, and they said this is the future. I don't think it's operational, yes, but it was a people were so excited. They said this is pretty good. Pepper's pretty good. And the idea that it would be more affordable, it would be more convenient. So you see all these designs, and you see also a lot of young people. You don't just see the old people who inherited a mortuary funeral business from generations and generations. You see a lot of young people who are they're doing startups. They're trying to get into it. It's a new opportunity for employment. I mean, in a precarious job market, it's a new opportunity. So death is selling in a variety of ways. I mean, it's capitalistic. I mean, it certainly is capitalistic. So that's one part of this. Great question. Yeah.
I have a comment and a simple question. Just something I thought of, like based on that last question that I thought was really interesting. When I was in Japan this past year, when I was leaving to come back here, I had so many things I needed to like get rid of that I was going away. So I tried with my landlord and my school to research like where can I donate things. And there's almost nowhere to like donate things in Japan. There are some places, but they're very specific.
Right.
And I ended up donating them to a place where I had to spend my own money to ship things to them.
So Japan.
And more money than them overseas. So I just thought that was very interesting. Like, it's actually very hard to just donate things to Japan. Not that it's impossible, it's just hard to find places. And then the simple question I have was out of curiosity, how much does it cost to rent annually, like a grave site in Japan on average?
Yeah. So I'll answer that. I mean, I'll comment on the first. Your comment is great, and you're right. There's kind of this antipathy to use stuff or donating it, and how would that work? I mean, it's a little odd, but it also means at the time of death, it becomes kind of a problem. Because if you die and you have a lot of stuff, I mean, it's a problem even for people who have kin, because then the kin have to take care of it. And, I've heard of also many cases where there's a lot of tension. The kids are saying, Mom, please, could you get rid of, your house is just full of all this stuff. And please, the mom doesn't want to get rid of it because she's attached to it. And so the relationship between the person and the thing, and then what happens to the spirit is so incredibly interesting. And some of these new services like this Ihin Seiri Gaisha, they sell their service as taking care respectfully of things. They say, we don't just treat it like garbage. But in fact, because again, I shadowed them for 3 times, they're taking it out to a truck. I mean, it is garbage. They're taking it out to a truck, but they're taking it out respectfully. So the care is also really interesting, even as you are transporting something to the garbage site. How you tend to it then can matter. And that's part of what they're selling the service on. We will tend to your stuff. So again, if you're thinking, oh, I have no one who's going to do this for me, so I should really handle it ahead of time. Well, maybe I'll hire them to do it. They'll say, well, we're not going to just treat your stuff as if we're going to throw it away or send it overseas. We'll tend to it very carefully. That matters. So there's effective labor. I mean, you're selling the service of effective, labor. The question about how much it costs, I don't have the figures. It's a little hard to say what it would be, because if you would go into a family plot, or if you would buy a family plot, incredibly expensive. Particularly if you would do it in Tokyo, particularly if you do it, Aoyama, one of the big, cemeteries, it's really expensive. If you already have a family plot and you're just going into the family plot, then you're paying like a funeral company to help you get into the grave. And I don't, that can be incredibly expensive too. So if you negotiate with a funeral company to have a funeral, and then they're going to help transport the body to the crematory, and then they're going to help, orchestrate, if there's a meal afterwards, all of that is a lot of money. And so that's all a part of the bear. So the trend for all of that is minimalization. So it used to be, the the more formal kind of funeral. People are kind of abandoning that to just only a family funeral or just a direct burial. Goes straight from the crematorium right to wherever it's going to be deposited, whether that's a no kotsudo, columbarium, or wherever. But a lot of these newer places that are being offered in Shikatsu, one of the selling points is that they're trying to make it more affordable. And there's just a whole range. There's just a whole range. You can get high end, you can get Eitai Kuyo, which they say is eternal. You can get it either for 23 years. If you pay a little less, it'll be only 15 years. If you pay a little less, it'll only be 8 years. So, I mean, again, those of us who have spent time in Japan, this is familiar, right? I mean, it's you pay for according this service you, but a lot of the stuff, part of it is they're making it simple, more, more minimalistic, easier, fuss-free. Convenience is a big thing. If you don't have kin, don't worry, we'll handle it for you, and more affordable. So it's not necessarily that this stuff is more expensive. In fact, most of it's less expensive. If that, yeah. Well, let's go back. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question regarding spirits. So in comparison between the traditional graveyard and the automatic ones, I think the one difference that I saw was that for people paying visits to this traditional graveyard, they were hoping to meet the soul of their ancestors, as shown in the static AI generated image. The soul, like here, is kind of like moving through time in the sense that they were not meeting the previous soul that they visited previous time. So the soul kind of like also experience another time together with the living people. But again, the soul here is abstract and they're transparent. Whereas in the techno mutually where we saw there was animation and then the figure was animated.
That was just the one. That wasn't the automated grave. That one image. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that's only one example. The digitalized.
There's so many different iterations of this now. So the ones that I visited didn't have the hologram. They didn't have those images. The one image that I showed, I hadn't actually visited that one. But you're right, some of those have that. And so it's a really nice question if you're asking. So your question is what kind of relationship?
Not like
Right.
quasi substantial.
That's right.
But
right.
on the other hand, that's the interaction with that soul was remain in time because there's only the same image, the same video
That's
happening here. So that's totally different from the traditional graveyard. So I
That's
just think this
right.
the abstract versus substantial,
Right.
centralized, and also this
Right.
thing with time is continuous.
So that's really lovely. Yeah, and again, there are a lot of different designs. So I know an anthropologist who is also a designer who's crafted a device for continuing to have a relationship with the dead after they die. So you insert images ahead of time. And then, I mean, this is being done in the United States and other places too, so that you can call them up and kind of dialogue with them, and they will change their image. But the image was inserted and then kind of edited and kind of combined. It was inserted before, and then he kind of designs it after. So you can call it up. There are other people who design something for the 49 days of mourning, so that you can kind of stay in touch with some sort of image and some sort of presence, but only for the 49 days, at which point, some believe that now you transition into the spirit transitions. So, so there are other devices of keeping some sort of relationship with the dead. So, I mean, what I'm also particularly interested in what I shared with you today is what happens for people who don't have anyone who's going to do that for them. What do they do? So, but there are a lot of these new kinds of devices too, new kinds of butsudan, domestic shrines. So it used to be this big thing. Now you can have just a little one, and it can be electronic, and it can turn on if you tap it, So there are different ways. And some people say, now we're getting closer with the dead than we ever have been, because when you went to the family grave, well, you didn't ever see the spirit. Well, now you can see an image that this is even better. So, and some people who do the Tamoto Kuyo with wearing the pendants, they go, this is so much better. I would only go to the grave once a year. Now mom's with me all the time. It feels so much better. But then, of course, once I die, what's going to happen to mom and my necklace? So she's going to go away too. So back to temporality. What is the temporality of that? I mean, the temporality is a really interesting question. Thank you. Yeah.
I have a question about, oh, sorry, I missed the first half. If you have covered this, I apologize. So I wonder why Japanese are so willing to accept these new forms of death care. Like,
Yeah.
according to your field work, are they also happy about it, or someone has accepted with very first reluctance?
Right.
And I'm
Right.
thinking this especially in comparison with other East Asian countries like China and South Korea, who also experience similar demographic social crisis and also have similar cultural background.
Right.
So I wonder, first of all, I don't know anything about these new forms in China and South Korea, but I do feel the Japanese, I'm kind of surprised how they are willing.
Right. So the question, if you didn't hear it, is why are Japanese so willing to be so innovative and to adopt what seems to be kind of radically experimental death forms? And how do they feel about it? Are they in fact happy about it, or is there some resistance or sadness, even nostalgia? And what about this getting circulating or getting exported to other countries, other Asian countries? I think some new kinds of designs are being tried in like China, and I think in Taiwan, and I think in Hong Kong, and I think in Singapore. And sometimes for different reasons. In Singapore, apparently because of the congestion of the space, that you're only allowed, you can be buried, but the body can only be buried for there's a time limit back to temporality. It's like 7 years, and then you have to exhume the body and you have to cremate it, and then it has to go into a columbarium for reasons of space. So why are the Japanese I mean, that's a complicated question. And I thought a lot about that. I mean, I'm not sure everyone is wildly happy, but I was surprised. I mean, even when I saw Pepper at Index, and I would have thought, oh, that's kind of weird. But I listened to people and they went, wow, Pepper's pretty good. And there was a real human priest behind Pepper, and people weren't paying him any attention. They were just paying Pepper attention. And people say, well, some people even use kind of maybe essentialist arguments to say, well, this goes back to Shinto. There's, an animist, acceptance of things that are non-human. And, people have said that about robots. Well, robots, we can kind of be in touch with robots. I mean, we don't think that it's necessarily alien. There can be something, that is compatible with humans. So there's that. And I think also from doing my field work, I think some people feel, I mean, I've spoke to people who just said, look, if we don't do something, it's going to die out. The old system is not sustainable. It's going to die out. I mean, there are ancestral graves in some cemeteries, as much as 40% are abandoned. People aren't upkeeping them either because the family line died out. It's inconvenient, it's too expensive. And so people will say, this is dying out. And people are sad about that. That doesn't feel good. It's reported on quite a lot in the news. So I think it feels like this is a better alternative. And there's a certain amount of hype around it. We don't have this yet in the United States. I mean, some people now are becoming a little bit more willing to talk about death at death cafes, and some people say there's a death positivity movement now happening in America. But in Japan, there's I find a wider openness. People are willing, when I go to, ending center, and 3 hours, design your own funeral. You might think, well, that's a sad, everyone's going to be crying. Hardly. People are laughing. They're putting calligraphy and manga on a coffin and jump into the coffin for a 60-minute tryout. And that's like wild. And so doesn't exactly mean they're happy. It's not like, great, I can't wait to die. It's not like that. But it's a surprising, I mean, I call it necroanimism, is a word that I use in my book. It feels animated. There's an animism. There almost feels like it gives a certain kind of life sometimes to people before they die. It gives them something to do. And yeah. Awesome.
Thank you. Actually, what you were just saying connects really nicely with what I was putting together in my own head. So thank you so much for the talk. Thank you for all your work, and thank you for joining us here on officially the coldest day. So apologies for that.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about people I know who have a real gustan and have stuff in the house, and it's usually a really sad death. It's usually a younger person.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like, and I'm sorry if I, but and I was thinking, I wonder if you saw, it's one thing. I mean, what a lovely attitude to be like, let's plan a funeral. And in my head, that's easier to do when you're 80.
That's right. That's
and
absolutely right.
And so I was wondering if you saw differences with. I'm not saying that any death is not tragic,
Right.
but people whose lives were shortened at a much younger age.
That's a great question. So the question is, what about young people? Surely the register, the effective register around someone dying young is different than someone dying old. And that's a great question. So in the research I did for this, I didn't do a whole lot with that. I did more research on that in my previous book with precariousness, where it's sad, and the suicide rate varies by year, but it's still pretty high. Hikikomori is still a phenomenon. Loneliness, feelings of hopelessness are still in Japan, and it hits young people differently than it hits older people. And so I didn't spend a whole lot of time in this book thinking about how does that map onto death, except some of the activities that I went to. Like there's a coffee shop called Ocean Cafe where you can go and get a cup of coffee, and then also you sign up for a set where you talk about death. And they have different sets. So one was about scattering your ashes, The other one, though, was making memories. Make a scrapbook. And I thought, what is this? You make a scrapbook of memories. It's kind of like ending notes. And I did it with 5 people, and 2 of the people were young. So this doesn't answer your question, but they were young. And I was surprised that they were doing that because it's kind of anticipating, memories in the future. Maybe no one would do this for me. Maybe no one would assemble this for a funeral. And they seemed pretty lighthearted, and they weren't talking about death, but that Ocean Cafe, that's what that is. So, but you're right. And if one thing that I did spend a lot of time with was the phenomenon of lonely death. And lonely deaths, often hit middle-aged men. I mean, that's the most likely middle-aged, not old. It's like 50, 60 men who are underemployed and estranged from family. But of course, it can be young people too. And I do think that registers differently. I think that's just hard when someone dies. And when someone dies by suicide, there's also kind of stigma. Are they really could they be buried, in the same way? Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I don't feel that I can answer that real well, but it's a great question. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for your talk. I have a question about function of graves nowadays.
Yes.
I remember that when I was small, we're visiting, we able to get together and reunite family members. But these days we seldom have that kinds of opportunities. But you mentioned automatic graves, like automatically. During your field work, did you see that kind of function? I mean, to reunite family member, or was it really individualized?
That's a great question. So the question is, in the more traditional style, the grave is not only for the dead, it's a gathering spot. And it's an important gathering spot. You go back, I mean, depending on whether you can afford the time and money, but usually at Oshogatsu at New Year's and during the summer, Obon, and special anniversaries. And you share food and you speak to the dead and you speak to one another, and with all the drama that can come with families. And the question is, do people still do that with these new forms of burial sites like automated graves? And I don't think so much. I think not so much, because I think a lot of the people who are getting buried there are getting buried there because either they don't have kin or they want to ease the burden, because some people will say, like I have friends who have two adult children and they have grandchildren, and they are not going to have a family grave because in part they think all those getting together, they think it's kind of a burden. I mean, maybe your experience was a good one, but they think that they don't want to burden their children and their grandchildren to tend to the grave and have to visit the grave. So that's kind of interesting. And so I think maybe not so much, but then the fact that it's supposed to be convenient. So a lot of these new style places are close to subway stations, and they say it's really easy. You know, convenience is one of the ways of promoting it. And so I, like one night I was having drinks with a couple friends, and one woman said, "Oh, I just visited my aunt and my uncle at the columbarium." I said, "You did?" She said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It was really, I just did it on the way home from work. Oh, yeah, yeah, it was really easy. You know, I just stopped in, you know, like 15 minutes and paid my respects." So you do have that you could do that you could make it so that it doesn't have to be a big deal. You could go on your way home from work. And I think that's also the way that they're trying to promote it. Don't make it that it has to be such a big deal. You have to go out to the countryside. You have to spend 3 days, spend a lot of money. Make it so that you could just do it. Oh, Tuesday night. Yeah, I have an hour. I could do that. So again, I don't know how that changes the valence of that. Does that lessen it? Does that make it? I don't know, but it changes it. Yeah. Hi.
I'm from an area in Michigan actually that receives a lot of Japanese expats. And I was kind of curious a little bit about how that could sort of affect, because obviously if they're sent here for 4 or 5 years, they might not be able to upkeep their family graves.
Exactly.
I know you mentioned that you can pay people to go and clean them, but I was just wondering if that would be a concern, or also like if you plan on leaving, is like having somebody there to take care of your family grave if you plan on like immigrating to a new country.
Exactly.
Or if, you know, you are immigrating, like,
Right.
are there ever concerns of like, are you having your maid sent back and all this
Exactly.
complicated? I was just curious. To see
Great
what you
question.
think about that.
So the question is, what about people who are, I mean, yeah, who leave Japan, they're over here for a few years. What do they do about tending to the graves? Yeah, I have a friend who came over to the United States in maybe the 1980s. He's the oldest son. So traditionally, the duty falls on the oldest son. The successor is supposed to be the oldest son. And his family grave is in yeah, Shikoku, and he would go back every once in a while to try to tend to the grave. And he had not sisters, but I think he had cousins who were tending to the grave. But he knew that they shouldn't, that it was really his responsibility. And I think he felt a great burden and a great responsibility I think he felt that he was forsaking it. He did exactly what I said. He closed up the grave. He closed up the grave and he moved it, in his case, not into an automated grave. He moved it into a Buddhist temple, not one that the family had any connection to. And he paid a certain amount of money, you know, when it's a Buddhist temple, they don't say this is how much you give an offering. And they perform a taikuyo. And in fact, I attended the ceremony where the first ceremony he had in the Buddhist temple. And he said afterwards, "Oh, I feel so relieved. I feel so relieved." You know, because I didn't want to go back to Japan because he has kids here now. Both of his kids have married Americans. He knows that they're all going to be buried here. And he didn't know what to do. And he felt bad. He felt that he was shirking his responsibility. And I've spoken to quite a few people who say that would relieve them of incredible sense of responsibility. They want to take care of their ancestors. They want to make sure their ancestors are okay. So that was interesting. And this particular guy, when I asked him, "Well, where are you going to be buried?" He said, "Oh, anywhere, it doesn't matter. I think, oh, I don't know, just a natural burial spot here, you know, in North Carolina, whatever." And I thought that's so interesting that in his case, he was so much more worried about his ancestors than about himself. So there's also that. There's still that kind of sense of continuity. It's still there. What do I do about people who I've been tending to, or should be tending to. Yeah, so that's interesting. And then sometimes the alternative is go to this high-tech place. I mean, kind of back to the question, do people feel bad about it? Well, he felt positively joyous. Said, what a relief. Thank goodness. What a relief. So there's also that sense of relief. Yeah. Christy.
Thank you for an absolutely fascinating talk. I have so many questions that I want to tell you.
Please. Yeah.
I work in Hungary and was at a very, what Hungarians would think anyway, of Asian themed burial where the remains were in a fountain that was all mosaics, and then the fountain sprayed the remains into the air as a way of kind of aesthetically mimicking movement into the spirit world. And, and I don't know where it drained.
Well, that's another question. Where would it? Yeah.
In the industry side of it.
Right.
But I guess my question is about how you've, and I'm sure you talked about this in the book, but how you're differentiating commodification from mechanization.
Yeah.
And it seems,
Yeah.
because
That's right. That's right.
Paying for things is a form of care, and paying more is a form of status care, and that you're demonstrating your filial duties, and it's public. So there's something about moving this. So in Hungary, people have to go, and if they see that somebody else isn't taking care of grave, there's a lot of shaming involved.
Yeah.
And people are feeling, even if nobody is actually shaming, they feel like they might get shamed.
Yeah.
So it's partially about their ancestors would have cared.
Yeah.
So it's about caring for ancestors, also about the shaming part. And so the care of putting them in this more modern form, where it's not, you can call it commodification, you can also call it, you say this already, just sort of how care is now demonstrated through gifting forms of technology. Like I gave my mom when she was ailing a smartwatch because I couldn't be there, and it was a way of my caring for her at a distance because I could tell if she fell.
Right.
So yeah, mechanization care, and we have some students who are working on mechanization of prayer, who might ask a question.
Well, let me address your question first. So the event that you attended in Hungary, I don't know what to say about that. That's out there. That the ashes would just be shot out and go into the air. That's interesting. Yes. And you said you might send me a visual of that. The other question is really good. And I spend a lot of time talking about that in the book. I don't know if I quite answer that because it's both. You're absolutely right. It's commodified, but there's nothing new about that. The death industry for a long time in most places has been, completely embedded in commodification. We pay funeral parlors, we pay people when you have a plot, you're paying the cemetery. People have to open and close the plot. I mean, this goes way back in Japanese history and US history and Hungarian history. So the commodification in and of itself is in there. Absolutely right. The mechanization, what I find interesting is replacing the kin. And the case that you give of your mother, that's right. So you technologize ways of trying to care either at a distance or that just might make it better for her because she's in a room and you can't be in the room with her all the time. And so it's a way of replacing human kin with machines or devices that you are hoping will be an extension of you, but will also provide in an attentive way. And that also comes with price. But maybe we could dialogue about this because I don't feel that I've quite gotten it. And I've started thinking about what I call contractual sociality, because you have to sign a contract now. And you used to have a social contract with your kin. That was a contract, but it was a social contract, kind of a gift, I'll take care of my ancestor, but when I die, my kids better take care of me at the grave. But now you're contracting with the automated grave, or you're contracting with someone else who says, we will do that now. We're going to do that. And it is a contract, and it's time. It's also time-based. We will do it for a time. So I don't know. And it's not a matter of just saying, is that bad or good, or was the old way better? And this is, it's not so much that as to think about these terms. And yeah, is mechanization, of course, it's not necessarily bad. There are incredible advantages. But I guess one of the questions that we're always confronted by, are you losing something of the human? And is it becoming dehumanized, or are you trying to humanize it? Because otherwise, for a lot of these people, the alternative is also pretty dehumanizing. I'm going to be a lonely dead and no one's going to take care of me and I'll be a disconnected soul wandering. Well, that's not very. So being an automated in an automated grave, it might not seem very humanistic, but thinking about it the other way, it may be pretty humanistic, even though it's run by, a conveyor belt. But I'd love to dialogue. And students, do you have your students? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was curious because I guess like it's true that my own research interests are very much related. In that you know those like chanting Buddha boxes. They're honestly they're more popular in China and Taiwan, which is kind of the context I look at.
Yeah.
But essentially they'll like recite or chant like the Buddha's name in repetition, like very, very much similar to Pepper.
Yeah.
Who I was really interested in.
Yeah.
But
yeah. That goes way back, probably.
Exactly.
That goes, and there are things like that in Japan that go way back. That's right. Yeah.
So, which is why it's so
Yeah.
interesting because like I think that so much of what you're talking about is like when you talk about these like these continuities that we see, of course it's like very easy for us to say that, oh, what we're dealing with is like a lot of like mediated relationalities between living and dead, between like future self, present, like like these kind of like very much mediated relationalities where like we're depending on like the whatever is involved, one usually will constitute the other. And then when we're talking about like continuity in this way, of course we kind of want to be like, there is a large part of me that wants to be like, oh, this is just like merely like a different form of mediation, but like what like the relationality that's happening is still relationality. And we can talk about it in terms of continuity, but I guess like we also have to contend with these like the particularities of the forms of mediation that are changing.
Right.
So kind of my question is like related to that a bit because this makes me think of is, especially when you're talking about like the anxieties or precariousness of like an individual who maybe will anticipate that they won't have kin to take care of them in anticipation of this like possible future. I'm also thinking about like I think a common example or instance in like at least a Western context would be like this like anxiety around the afterlife of our like digital data,
Right.
and like this like future anticipated futurity with like who owns that.
Right.
And I was wondering because of this like mutual constitution, of course, like you see that like the self has been like redivided in a very strange way where now you feel like an identity or a connection with like this digital data or this like these digital forms of like the self and that you continue to live on. So I was just wondering if you saw how like instance of these like this mediated care work or like automated care work, if you saw this kind of like redivisioning or like conceptualization of the self or how people are like relating to their current self.
So that's pretty complicated. So yeah, I mean, I think part of what we're talking about is the relationship between the person and the thing and the, and how others factor into that and how all of that kind of gets mediated and taken care of and also ownership. So who owns your data after you die? Is it going to be out there? Is it going to be possibly dangerous? Who's going to take care of that? But also who owns you? And there are people who work on who owns who owns the dead? Because it used to be that it would be the eldest son as successor who would own the dead, who would own the grave and also be responsible for caregiving it. So this isn't exactly a clear answer to your question, but it is. So what happens after you die? What happens after Eitai Kuyo ends and you're still in the storage box? I mean, how long are you in that storage box for? And so what is the self there? I mean, it raises really interesting questions. And there are people who are working on this, in Japan. They're also working on intellectual property, on exactly what you're talking about with the data. But I think it becomes pretty complicated. And yeah. Yeah, and then with the example, even Christy, that you gave of the dead remains kind of going up in the in the sky, is that an indication that now the self itself is getting disassembled? Okay, so now I'm dying, so now I'm just particles, and that would be okay too, because there are also beliefs that, well, you could just get collectivized and deassembled, and that would be a different form of post-death existence. That, yeah, I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but there's a lot there that's really interesting. Yeah, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I got two questions before, but I feel like you already kind of tackle these questions, so I'll skip them. And now I just came up with a very unbaked question. So I'm sorry, but
Unbaked is good.
So what I heard from your talk, I'm sorry, I was late, so I didn't hear the first part. What I heard from your talk is that there's a kind of not very stable dichotomy between representation and reality, and we can find this dichotomy, like it's a persistent question across diverse bodies of literature regarding East Asian cultures. Like this the question, the issue of representation versus reality doesn't only emerge as the moments of death, but it's like there is a continuity of this kind of dichotomy. Like in some sense, maybe we can say that people across East Asia countries, they always live in these two worlds, a world of representation and a world of reality. So I wonder, like, how do you is that possible for us to consider the continuity of live in both the worlds, and how and this kind of continuity would is brought into the dead world, like it constituted a very basic conditions for people there to imagine, to practice their death.
So I'm not sure quite what do you mean by representation? I mean, representation is huge, and reality is huge too. So the relationship between representation and reality is.
Thanks for letting me explain. Like just look at the ghosts there.
Yeah,
they are kind of representation of the soul. Yeah. And look at what you just talked about, the animated figures of the dead.
Right.
They are kind of representation, and also the ending notes.
Right.
They are kind of representation in the medium of text.
So I guess I wouldn't use the word representation. So the question is about what is the relationship between representation and reality, maybe in this new, this new kind of sphere of new kinds of ways of doing death. Is it changing? Is it shifting? Ending notes are interesting because I think people they're interested in kind of representing themselves. What has my life been? So here's a book of, this was my life, and this is what I would like people to remember at my death, this is what I did as a girl, and my father was this, and I had this incredible thing happen when I was 20, and so I'm writing down the things that matter to me. I mean, I won't exactly call that representation, but one of the things that I find so striking about that is that these books are done as if someone's going to do something with them at your death, Well, maybe they will. Maybe they won't. So that's just kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting. So am I representing to myself the reality that, maybe no one's going to do this? And so I'm anticipating a reality that maybe I'm not going to have a funeral and no one's really going to, be able to kind of report on this. And so I'm going to do a certain kind of care work. I think it's a form. I mean, I kind of prefer the word care. It's kind of self-care. I'm going to care for myself, in anticipation that maybe no one else is going to do that. So I don't know about representation. I don't know if that's a representation of me or whatever. And this, yeah. So when you go into an automated grave, I mean, one question I asked quite a few people when I was doing field work is, what do you think happens to you after death? I asked a lot of people at Ending Center, which is an alternative grave. It's a natural burial spot. All of them said, maybe nothing. I went, huh? Maybe nothing. Yeah, like I don't know. There was no elaborate, oh, there's going to be this afterlife, and my grave friends are going to be there, or my little dog is going to be there, or the cherry blossoms. It was like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. All very vague. So I thought, and yet you're preparing like a lot for at least to have this grave and ending, center. So again, I haven't quite figured out what that's all about. So it's not so, I mean, yeah, they don't want to be a disconnected soul, but what exactly the reality of that, they don't know what that is. And it didn't seem that they were particularly concerned about it. They were almost more concerned about making sure that they do what they can now. Let's get prepared. And at long list, check off inheritance. Got it. Living will. Got it. Got it. What kind of grape? Got it. Will my pet come with me? Yeah, pet's already waiting. Died 5 years ago. The urn's already. Got it. Elaborate checklist. But what's exactly going to happen after death? Not so much. So you tell me what that means. I don't quite know what that means, but I don't know if representation is the word that's going to help us figure that one out. But you're right. There's changing valences here. That's for sure. And how they're changing is really interesting. Yeah.
Do you have some questions from Zoom? I'm going to give a slightly more related one first, and then I'll give the second one after you finish answering. This person said that there are several companies in the UK that allow for virtual reality funerals where you can visit the person's past, their favorite vacation spots, even long after it's happened and into the future. And several that even allow you to speak through AI technologies with the deceased. Did you see any examples of this evolving in Japan?
Yeah, that same thing. Yes, there are virtual. There were virtual funerals during COVID. Apparently, I know someone at Tokyo University who's worked extensively on this. He says that they were more popular during COVID for obvious reasons, and he said they're actually not that popular anymore. But there are various kinds of new technologies to stay in touch with the dead after they die, or to be able to visit, some version of memory. So yes, there are such designs happening in Japan as well.
And then my second question from Zoom, this person said, could you please elaborate more on the stigma around using old things or things from the dead, and how is this changing?
Great question. Back to things. One of the behaviors that I found very interesting when I was doing when I was shadowing the cleanup companies is the first time I went, there was a box. So it was the family. This was a woman whose mother had died, and so she needed help kind of doing the remainder. And most of the stuff that she wanted was out of the house. So the cleanup workers were just supposed to come in and just kind of take apart everything else there. And there was a cardboard box there. And it said Kuyo on the box. And I said, and it was the work crew. I said to the head of the work crew, I said, what is that box for? And he said, this is for things, the precious things that were closest to her when she died. We need to save those, like the nightgown she had on in the hospital when she died. And she made like little doilies with her hands. We need to put those in the box. And he said, these items of hers that don't have market value, but they have sentimental value. We're going to burn them. We're going to do a version of, we're going to do a burning. And I do that once a month back at the office of special things that were specially close to the person. And I thought, oh, that's so nice. But I think there's also something about that the soul or the spirit could still be kind of hovering. And I think you need to invite and detach the spirit from the thing. I think in part it's you're honoring the spirit through their things, but I think there's also this possible ambiguous presence of the dead that could be a little haunting and not necessarily in a good way. So I think there's also that. So I think towards the dead things, maybe it's not so much a stigma, but maybe in general, there's also that sense we have to be careful. They're not just inert. It's not just a thing. They're also still, there's still a kind of animation in there of the dead. That might be true. Yes. You're okay.
I was just curious because I know you mentioned talking a lot about like wanting that sort of like continuity and going on, and how like maybe the spiritual aspect is sort of uniquely non-Western. Or sort of like we don't see that same kind of care for you have to go and visit all your ancestors' graves and take care of that. But I do feel like a lot of people here too have a similar sense of like wanting to continue living on after death and like that technological advancement. But instead of trying to take care of that, I feel like I run into a lot more people talking about like wanting to freeze their bodies and preserve that after death. So I feel like it's two very different.
That's interesting.
Aspects. And I was curious
That's
what
right.
your take between
That's right.
the different.
That's right. That's interesting.
And
Wow,
philosophical
that's great.
phenomenon
That's
and like the
great.
division there and trying to care for like let's make these technological advancements to just make the care of the dead easier versus here it's like
That's right. Keep
we're
me
gonna
alive.
live
Yeah, right.
along our own lives and then continue living on instead of trying to work on like
It's great. So I've never heard of cryogenics in Japan. There is probably there too. I mean, there probably are some people who would be interested in freezing their bodies. But your observation is really astute because it would seem to point to a different kind of desire, right? If you're freezing yourself, Elon Musk, you're hoping that, someday in the future that you will come back and repopulate even more, have more children. And it's quite a different thing that's operating. I think it feels more relational, oddly enough, because I'm talking about the derelational. It feels more relational that you're in an automated grave. You're concerned about you becoming an unrelated, entity, but you're worried about your ancestors. So the question that you asked before, yeah, I want to make sure that my ancestors will have a relationship. That's what I'm purchasing. That's what I'm mechanizing, the relationship, the possibility of a relationship by putting them in here. So even though we may think, well, that's weird, it's an automated grave that feels lonely and all alone. I think the opposite. I think people are doing it in order to form a relationship in to counter the possibility that otherwise they would have no relationship or their ancestors would have no relationship. A very different thing. I think that's really nice. Yeah. Good observation. Yeah.
You answered a lot of questions, so
Okay, we have 3 minutes.
okay. I have just really quickly what you questioned before this, you were talking about how there's like still a haunting that could possibly remain. And I'm kind of curious how, and I'll connect it to like a broader question I'm thinking about. Like why is this possibly this haunting getting registered in like these sentimental items, but then that same animation when it happens like in the automated gravesite is seen as completely appropriate.
Right.
And kind of more broadly, I guess I'm just curious about like what are the we've talked about like the flower, the maintenance of the flowers and like the freshness, like there's like certain service work
Right.
that is seen as really important to like kind of not let this be seen as a commodified, like it's still seen as care, not commodification.
Right.
And I'm curious about just like what is like the kind of like what are the things necessary to keep that kind of distinction, but rather than like seeing it, oh, this is just like well, okay, and then kind of another related
Yeah.
question is you mentioned like the keeping the jewelry, and that's like more so for like it seemed more so for the wearer to have that connection and that remembrance.
Yeah.
And like to not feel lonely.
Right.
And this kind of loneliness is important, right, not just for the person to be deceased, but then also endemic of like the contemporary people.
Right.
I don't know. Those are just some kind of thoughts.
Yeah, they're great. They're great. So yeah, I mean, about the last one first. Yeah, well, I mean, literally one of the persons who is a vendor for these goods pitches it as a way of preventing you from being lonely, that you can carry something. I mean, I kept thinking about Tamagotchi that I wrote about, and kids were told that they could have a virtual pet that would keep them from being lonely. And I thought, wow, is this the same kind of thing? That the Tamagotchi is now the pendant I'm wearing my mom? But that's kind of the way it was pitched. But you're right, it's more about the wearer but it's keeping back to relationship. You're wearing a relationship. You're not just wearing mom. I mean, you're wearing a relationship. And in answer to your other question, it's also about the relationality. I mean, what I've been told, and some of you I'm sure have done this, is that you go to the grave and you're performing care because it's a relationship. You're cleaning it, you're putting water on there, you're giving fresh flowers. And so you're performing work, but it's care work. You're performing your attention. And you do, I mean, I've accompanied, I'm sure you've done this many times. You go and you're robust. I mean, let's get the water, let's just clean it up. And you're also doing something. And so as I've been working on death, I've realized also in mourning and grief, having something to do is incredibly important. So you're performing that. And you're right that then that also is a sign. Once some person said, so if you go to a grave and the grave is messy, did you say this? I don't, yeah, there is shame. There is shame that you go, Bob, they're not attentive. They're not attentive. So there's something about the very cleanliness of the automated grave that itself has a certain kind of value to it. When I told my friend about the automated grave, she said, oh, it looks so clean. It looks so well tended to. Well, yeah, it's tended to, not by the individual families, it's attended to by the staff, but it's kept impeccably clean, which is incredibly important. So again, you all can help me think about what does that signify? That the cremains there are being taken care of. And if so, why in Hungary do the remains go up there? They're not being taken care of. So, or they're being taken care of in a different way. But that physical tending to is so important in Japan. And so that's, yeah, and tending to the items of mom by putting it in a kuyo box. The answer to that one is what is the difference there? The Buddhist, it has to be attended to by a Buddhist ritual that has to mediate. So if the Buddhist priest does some sort of ceremony on those things, that's helping the spirit leave those things. And also at the automated grave, you also have a Buddhist priest. And a lot of these automated graves, interestingly enough, are hybrids between industry and Buddhism. It's at a Buddhist priest. It's a Buddhist temple. And Buddhist temples are losing business in Japan. So this is a way for them to become more sustainable. Now they offer this. Oh, you don't just have to be a Persian. You don't just have to be a Buddhist. You can get buried this way. And by the way, we could use your business. So, but the Buddhist priest performs that ritual. So it's also doing that kind of work.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Allison, and thank you to everyone who attended in person and on Zoom. We will see you guys starting in January for our next semester's lecture series. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.